The North Atlantic in winter is not merely cold, it is a living, breathing entity of violence, a realm where the boundary between sea and sky dissolves into grey chaos. 40 miles from the nearest inhabited shore of Scotland's Outer Hebrides, the Scary Moor Lighthouse stands as a solitary sentinel, a cylinder of weathered granite rising 120 feet from a jagged rock barely an acre in size. Built in 1869, its walls are 15 feet thick at the base, tapering to 8 at the lantern room. For 6 months of every year, this lighthouse is more fortress than beacon, and the man who tends it becomes less a keeper and more a survivor. His name is Martin Graves, 53 years old, a veteran of 17 winters at Scary Moor. He has watched colleagues request transfers after single seasons, has seen younger men break under the psychological weight of isolation. But Martin has always returned, drawn by something he cannot fully articulate, perhaps the clarity that comes from stripping life down to its essential elements. This winter, however, will test even his seasoned resilience. The meteorological charts transmitted before the radio systems failed showed something unprecedented, a sequence of 3 major storm systems converging, creating what forecasters were calling an atmospheric bomb cyclone of historic proportions. The transmission cut out mid-warning, and Martin has been alone with the building roar ever since. The first storm arrived on a Tuesday morning in late January. Martin had prepared as he always does, every loose item secured, storm shutters bolted over the lower windows, emergency supplies inventoried and distributed throughout the tower's 5 levels. The lighthouse operates on redundancy upon redundancy. 3 diesel generators where 1 would suffice. Food stores for 6 months. Fresh water collected from rain in concrete cisterns. The light itself, a first-order Fresnel lens weighing 3 tons, has both automated systems and manual hand-crank mechanisms dating back to the Victorian era. Martin checked every system twice, then checked again, because in this place, the difference between thoroughness and death can be measured in degrees. The wind struck first, reaching sustained speeds of 90 miles per hour within the first 6 hours, gusting to 120. The sound is unlike anything experienced on land, not a howl or a shriek, but a physical pressure that vibrates through stone and bone alike. The waves followed, building from 15 feet to 20, then 30, then heights that exceeded the measuring capabilities of his instruments. Through the reinforced glass of the lantern room, he watched mountains of dark water rise from the chaos, their peaks torn into horizontal spray by the screaming wind. When they struck the lighthouse base, the impact shuddered through 120 feet of stone, and seawater exploded upward in white geysers that reached past the gallery deck 60 feet above sea level. The first critical moment came on the storm's second night. Martin was performing his standard rounds when he heard a sound that cut through even the storm's fury, the sharp crack of breaking stone. He descended the spiral staircase at a controlled run and found the source in the storage level. A section of the wall had fractured under the repeated hammering of the waves. Seawater was jetting through a gap the width of his fist, each pulse timed to the surge and retreat of the ocean outside. In calm conditions, this would be a maintenance issue. In the heart of a cyclonic storm, it was an existential threat. Salt water destroys everything. It corrodes metal, degrades concrete, shorts electrical systems, and contaminates fresh water supplies. Left unchecked, this breach could flood the storage level within hours and render the entire lighthouse uninhabitable within 2 days. Martin moved with practiced efficiency. From the repair locker he retrieved a collision mat, a heavy canvas sheet reinforced with rubber, along with wooden shores, a sledgehammer, and quick-setting hydraulic cement. The spray of incoming seawater was icy enough to numb exposed skin within seconds, but he worked steadily, forcing wadded canvas into the breach, then hammering wooden shores into place. The flow reduced to a trickle. He mixed the hydraulic cement with seawater and troweled it over the canvas and into every visible crack, applying 3 layers until the leak had stopped entirely. By the time he finished, his hands were bleeding from a dozen small cuts, his clothes soaked through with freezing seawater, and his body trembling with exhaustion and cold. He climbed to his quarters, stripped off the wet garments, and stood under a gravity-fed shower of precious fresh water, letting the warmth penetrate his core. The shower was a luxury he rationed, 5 minutes per week under normal circumstances, but hypothermia is a survival threat as real as any structural failure. Dressed in dry thermal layers, he prepared a meal of tinned soup and ship's biscuit, eating mechanically while listening to the storm rage outside. The wind had not diminished. If anything, it had intensified. The psychological dimension of isolation in such conditions follows a predictable pattern. The first week alone is often the easiest, the novelty of solitude, the satisfaction of routine. The second week brings the first whispers of restlessness, a heightened awareness of the absence of human voices. By the third week, the mind begins to turn inward, conversations becoming internal dialogues, memories replaying with cinema-like vividness. Martin has learned to manage this through structure. He maintains a written log, recording weather observations and maintenance activities in a leather-bound journal that now contains 17 volumes. He reads voraciously from a library of 200 books. He performs calisthenics in the watch room. He cooks deliberately, treating each meal as an event rather than mere sustenance. But beneath these routines, there is always the sound, the endless, battering roar of the ocean against stone. On the 6th day of the storm, a new threat emerged. Martin was in the lantern room performing the daily maintenance ritual when he noticed a hairline crack in one of the storm panes. These are not ordinary windows but panels of inch-thick tempered glass, each one capable of withstanding hurricane-force winds. A crack in such glass suggests forces at the edge of what the structure was designed to endure. He traced the fracture with his fingertip, feeling the slight depression where the surface integrity had failed. The crack ran diagonally across the southern pane, approximately 18 inches long. As he watched, a particularly massive wave struck the tower, and the crack extended another inch with an audible tick. The glass was failing progressively, and when it gave way entirely, the lantern room would be exposed to the full violence of the storm. The solution required working outside, in conditions that were objectively lethal. Wind speeds in excess of 100 miles per hour can strip the air from lungs and hurl a human body from a height like a discarded doll. The wind chill factor placed the effective temperature somewhere below -30 Fahrenheit. But the alternative was to lose the lantern room and, with it, the lighthouse's primary function. Martin dressed in layers, thermal underwear, fleece mid-layer, rubberized storm gear, a climbing harness, and a helmet with a face shield. From the emergency locker he retrieved a coil of braided steel safety cable and a collection of heavy-duty carabiners. The plan was simple in concept, harrowing in execution. He would clip into multiple anchor points on the gallery deck and apply an emergency patch of marine-grade plywood and sealant from the exterior. The moment he opened the access door to the gallery deck, the wind nearly tore it from his grip. He clipped his primary safety line to the rail, then his backup line to a separate anchor, and stepped out into the maelstrom. The wind was a solid, malevolent force that tried to peel him from the metal grating. He moved on hands and knees, clipping and unclipping his safety lines as he progressed around the circumference toward the southern exposure. Spray from the waves below reached him even at this height, freezing instantly on contact with metal and glass, coating everything in rime ice. He could see almost nothing through the face shield, navigating by touch and memory. When he reached the damaged section, he anchored himself in place with 3 separate safety lines. Working with hands already going numb despite insulated gloves, he positioned the pre-cut plywood sheet over the cracked glass, holding it in place while he drilled pilot holes through the wood and into the lighthouse's external frame with a battery-powered drill. Each screw had to be started carefully and driven home with a ratchet driver. The wind kept catching the plywood like a sail, trying to rip it from his grip. Twice he nearly lost it. Twice he wrestled it back into position and continued working. When all 8 screws were seated, he applied a thick bead of marine sealant around the entire perimeter. The patch would hold, not elegantly, not permanently, but long enough. The return journey to the access door was a crawl through a landscape designed to kill. The ice accumulation made every handhold treacherous. But he reached the door, hauled himself inside, and sealed it behind him. He had been outside for 43 minutes. His hands were white and wooden, lacking sensation. He spent the next hour rewarming them in tepid water, watching the color return, enduring the fierce pain that accompanies the restoration of circulation. Frostbite was a possibility, but he had avoided the deeper tissue damage that would cost him fingers. The storm's fury peaked on the 9th day with winds that the broken anemometer had recorded at 143 miles per hour before the instrument failed entirely. The waves exceeded anything in his experience. The entire lighthouse shook with each impact, a grinding vibration that felt like the stone itself was crying out. He stood in the watch room, monitoring systems, checking pressure gauges, listening to the structure's complaints, and maintaining the light. Always maintaining the light. Even if no ships ventured into these waters during such conditions, the light was his responsibility, his purpose, the reason for his presence in this outpost at the edge of the habitable world. It was during this peak that Martin experienced the phenomenon that every lighthouse keeper knows but few discuss, the sensation of the ocean as a sentient thing, an intelligence that tests and probes and seeks entry. The sound of the waves became almost rhythmic, almost purposeful. The spray against the windows formed patterns that the eye tried to resolve into faces. He knew this was the mind's response to extreme stress and isolation, the brain's attempt to find pattern and meaning in chaos. But knowing the mechanism did not diminish the experience. He found himself speaking aloud to the storm, narrating his actions. You won't have this tower. You won't have me. I've stood here through 17 winters, and I'll stand through 17 more. The sound of his own voice was strange in his ears, but it helped. It anchored him to himself. The breaking point came not from the storm's violence but from a quieter crisis. On the 11th day, Martin descended to the generator room for the routine morning check and found the primary generator silent. The vibration that had been a constant bass note in the tower's symphony was absent. He checked the fuel levels, adequate. He checked the oil pressure, normal. Everything appeared functional, but the generator would not restart. He switched to the secondary generator, which fired up immediately, but the failure troubled him. He spent 6 hours dismantling the primary generator and finally identified the problem, a failed fuel injector pump, a component he had no spare for because it had never failed in 17 years of operation. This is how survival situations cascade into catastrophe, not through single dramatic failures but through the accumulation of small degradations. 1 generator down. Communication systems offline. Supplies being consumed. Fresh water at 60% of capacity. The storm showing no signs of abating. Martin sat in the generator room and performed the mental calculation that every survivor must make, the assessment of resources against time. He had fuel for perhaps 30 more days on 1 generator. Food for 90 days on strict rationing. Fresh water for 45 days with minimal use. The variable was the storm. Weather patterns suggested that such systems typically lasted 2 to 3 weeks. He was approaching the end of week 2. The mathematics were uncomfortable but not desperate. Not yet. The psychological toll, however, was becoming harder to quantify. Martin had always prided himself on his mental resilience, but something was shifting. The dreams had become vivid and disturbing, nightmares of rising water, of the lighthouse crumbling, of being trapped in the lantern room as the ocean poured in. He would wake gasping, disoriented, unsure for several seconds where he was. During waking hours, he caught himself staring at nothing for long periods, losing track of time. He increased his physical routines, performing push-ups and sit-ups until his muscles burned, seeking exhaustion as a path to dreamless sleep. He read passages from his books aloud, just to hear words. He wrote extensively in his journal, documenting not just weather and maintenance but his internal state. On day 14, the wind began to ease. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but incrementally, dropping from sustained hurricane force to merely gale force, from gale to strong wind. The waves decreased in height and regularity. Patches of lighter gray appeared in the overcast. Martin stood in the lantern room and watched the transformation with cautious hope. He had survived. The lighthouse had survived. But he knew better than to celebrate prematurely. Winter in the North Atlantic is not a single storm but a succession of them. He used the calmer conditions to assess the damage. The exterior of the lighthouse was coated in ice. The antenna array for the radio system had been torn completely away. Several of the lower storm shutters were bent and would need replacement. But the structure itself had held. The walls were sound. The light had never failed. He inventoried supplies with meticulous care. Fuel, 26 days at current consumption. Food, 78 days on full rations. Fresh water, 38 days with strict conservation. The numbers were tighter than he preferred, but manageable if the weather cleared enough for a resupply vessel to reach him within the next 3 weeks. It was during this inventory that Martin found the leak in cistern number 2. The concrete had cracked during the peak of the storm's violence, and fresh water was seeping into the bilge space below. He caught it early, before more than 20 gallons had been lost, and managed to seal the crack with epoxy resin, but the incident recalibrated his resource calculations. Fresh water was now the limiting factor. He implemented immediate conservation measures: no more showers, minimal cooking with water, reliance on canned goods with high moisture content. He calculated that with these restrictions, he could stretch his supply to perhaps 50 days. The second storm arrived on day 17 with less warning than the first, the wind building from calm to violent in the space of 6 hours. This one came from a different direction, out of the northwest, and it carried something the first had not: snow. Not gentle flakes but wind-driven ice particles that moved horizontally, scouring everything they touched. The temperature plummeted. Inside the lighthouse, despite the small propane heater in his quarters, Martin could see his breath. He wore every layer he possessed and still felt the cold seeping into his core. This storm was shorter but more intense, a concentrated fury that lasted 4 days. During its peak, Martin lived in the watch room, unable to risk the staircase during the worst of the shaking, subsisting on cold rations and water, maintaining the light through sheer stubbornness. He watched the beam sweep across a landscape of white chaos, knowing that somewhere out there, ships were navigating by his light, that his vigil had purpose beyond mere survival. It was this thought, more than any other, that sustained him, the knowledge that his isolation served a function, that his endurance protected lives he would never see. When the second storm finally broke, Martin was running on fumes, physically exhausted, mentally strained to the point of fragility, supplies depleted to concerning levels. But the weather system that followed was different. The wind died almost completely. The sky cleared to a hard, crystalline blue. The temperature rose fractionally but perceptibly. And most importantly, he saw them on the horizon, the running lights of a vessel, the first ship he had seen in 3 weeks. He activated the emergency radio beacon, a low-frequency signal that required no antenna array, just raw power and persistence. And he waited. The resupply vessel arrived 36 hours later, a tough little ship designed for exactly these conditions, piloted by men who knew the waters and respected the sea. They brought fuel, food, fresh water, spare parts, and, more precious than any material goods, news of the outside world, human voices, confirmation that he had not been forgotten. Martin supervised the transfer of supplies with his usual meticulous care, but when the captain asked if he wanted to return to shore, to leave Scary Moor until spring, he shook his head. "The light needs tending," he said simply. "I'll see the winter through." As the vessel pulled away, Martin climbed to the lantern room and watched it disappear into the vast blue-gray expanse. The solitude descended again, but it felt different now, not oppressive but clean, purposeful. He had been tested by the ocean and the storm and his own isolation, and he had not broken. The lighthouse stood. The light burned. And somewhere in the machinery of his mind, he knew that he would return next winter, and the winter after that, because some men are meant to stand alone against the dark, and he was one of them. The ocean would always be there, patient and powerful and indifferent. And so would he, a keeper of light in the endless northern winter, surviving not despite the extreme but because of it, finding in the fury a clarity that the tame world could never provide.